Tonight on Politicat, Representative George Santos is indicted on 13 accounts. What this means for the politician.
After 3 years in the pandemic, the U.S. COVID restriction bill Title 42 ends tomorrow. How stakeholders prepare for its impacts on immigration.
And we head south to look at the implications of gerrymandering rulings and effects in the Carolinas.
Those stories and more tonight on Politicat.
It's your politics right now.
Evening, I'm Jonas Blum.
And I'm Ananya Chugh. We start tonight with breaking news.
This morning, Representative George Santos of New York surrendering to federal prosecutors on 13 charges and facing federal custody. Among the charges, campaign finance violations involving donations to a private company used for Santos's personal expenses during his House campaign. Prosecutors also charging Santos with fraudulently applying for unemployment benefits while ineligible and lying to authorities when interviewed. U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York describing the 13-count indictment as charging Santos with relying on repeated dishonesty and deception to ascend to the halls of Congress and enrich himself. If convicted, Santos would face a maximum of 20 years in federal prison. We will continue to follow this developing story. Ananya?
San Francisco-based First Republic Bank closed last Monday and was quickly bought by J.P. Morgan. First Republic is now the third U.S. bank to collapse in just the last 2 months, following the closures of Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank. Adding on to that, the Federal Reserve's interest rate is now over 5% for the first time since 2007. Some experts worry that these are signs of heading into economic recession. Lawmakers have met over the past days over the prospect of raising the debt ceiling, a move that the White House argues will help avoid a catastrophic debt default, which would raise the likelihood of recession. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the GOP have been reluctant to give in the Democrats' demands in raising the ceiling as negotiations continue. Title 42 will expire tomorrow. Politicat's Angela Zhang is here to explain what impacts this could have on immigrants, organizations, and the future of immigration governance in America.
At the U.S.-Mexico border, hundreds of migrants attempting to cross and seek asylum are detained day to day. Tomorrow, on May 11th, the end of a major policy known as Title 42 could change that. Former President Trump initially implemented Title 42 in March of 2020 as COVID restrictions. While the CDC said the order aimed to rapidly curb disease spread in crowded detention centers, some advocates criticize the title, claiming it is a veiled attempt to regulate immigration. In the past 2 years, the Biden administration shifting its stance on Title 42, from keeping the policy in place amid establishing a humanitarian parole process, to legal disputes with the Supreme Court, to deciding to end Title 42 when the United States announced the end of the COVID-19 health emergency in January of this year. Since 2020, more than 2 million migrants have been expulsed by border control, according to a report by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Border officials say the end of Title 42 may lead to a sharp increase in the number of individuals crossing the border. Migrants instead will be subject to Title 8, the code of official federal immigration laws. Regarding the end of Title 42, a divided Congress ensues. Senator Kyrsten Sinema warning a humanitarian crisis, introducing a bill to continue migrant expulsions, other members fixating on how to change the U.S. system. As of now, shelters prepare to house a growing number of migrants, but the immigration process still remains in question.
Thanks, Angela. Politicat will update you next week on how Title 42 will play out at the southern border and above.
And coming up, Sudan is reaching its third week of fighting, but last Thursday agreed to a week-long ceasefire. The factions met Saturday for conflict resolution conversations.
And controversy in Norway over a walrus statue unveiling. Stay tuned.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Go Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Welcome back. A spree of mass shootings striking the United States over the past 2 weeks. The latest, 8 dead and 7 wounded in a shooting in an outlet mall in Allen, Texas. The shooter killed by police sporting right-wing insignia on his clothing and interacting with neo-Nazi social media accounts prior to the shooting. On Sunday, the White House issuing this message about gun violence in America. Quote, "Once again, I asked Congress to send me a bill banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. I will sign it immediately." Just days earlier, tragedy in Cleveland, Texas. A shooter killing 5 people in what San Jacinto County Sheriff is describing like this.
When they got here, they found 4 people deceased inside of the residence, and there was an 8-year-old that had been shot. Everybody that was shot from the neck up.
Police arresting a man who a neighbor told Fox 26 Houston had exhibited violent behavior before. And at a hospital in Midtown Atlanta, the arrest of a Marine Corps veteran who shot 5 people, killing 1. The shooter's mother telling the media her son had been seeking the prescription drug lorazepam. These 3 situations add to the 32 mass shootings over the past 2 weeks. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their families. Ananya?
Fighting for Sudanese leadership broke out on April 15th between its army, paramilitary group, and the Rapid Support Forces. This conflict includes widespread displacement violence and civilian casualties. Aria Wozniak has been following closely. Aria?
On Thursday, May 4th, Sudan's 2 military factions established a week-long ceasefire. Conflict began mid-April, but now the country is struggling with a refugee crisis. The United Nations approximates 100,000 people have fled the country and warns the number fleeing could rise to 800,000. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre providing details on the situation in the daily press briefing. Let's take a listen.
We remain in close contact with the Sudanese military and civilian leaders to see what we can to help them identify a path to reach a sustainable cessation of hostilities that include humanitarian arrangements, and we are engaged at the highest levels regularly.
Sudan's military leader, General Abdel Fattah Burhan, and the Parliamentary Rapid Support Forces commander, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, sent negotiators on Friday to confirm the ceasefire. The parties reached an agreement and held in-person conflict resolution conversations Saturday, hosted by the United States and Saudi Arabia. At the moment, it is unclear the results of these talks. The plight of aid workers and civilians trapped in conflict zones without access to basic necessities like food, water, and medical care has sparked growing international concern. Currently, there is support from the United Nations in working towards a peaceful resolution and establishing measures to alleviate suffering. Jean-Pierre emphasized the U.S. government continues to evaluate its capacity to deliver humanitarian aid as the security situation permits. The President's national security team is in direct contact with Sudan's armed forces and Sudan's rapid support forces.
We are planning to use all available means, including using the pre-positioned medical and food supplies, to ensure that humanitarian assistance can resume once security conditions permit. Again, we are certainly gravely concerned.
Negotiations between the 2 military groups will discuss the 2 main centers of fighting, Khartoum and Omdurman, as well as protection for Sudanese civilian safety. We continue to follow the situation in Sudan. Jonas?
Thank you, Arya, for that important coverage. And also on the international front, in Norway, a statue is being unveiled commemorating a beloved walrus. The walrus named FREYA rose to fame last year for often sunbathing and at times tipping boats. Last August, officials euthanized her for being a threat to public safety. Politicat's Sadie Frankel is here with us in studio to illustrate how her legacy lives on. Sadie, can you tell us a little bit about this?
That's right, Jonas. Norway's newest statue remembers the young walrus FREYA, a popular sight in Norway last summer. She climbed into boats, occasionally unknowingly sinking them in her efforts to sunbathe. Prior to Norway, she'd been spotted on the coast of Denmark, in Germany, England, and the Netherlands, where she was the first walrus to be seen in 23 years. People recognized her by a pink spot on her nose, her small tusks, and an injury on her flipper. In Norway, people often visited, approaching her and even getting within touching distance. But this created danger to both the walrus and the people. In August of last year, Norwegian authorities deemed the dangers to both humans and the animals to be too great and sentenced FREYA to be euthanized by rifle. Since then, many have spoken out against alleged maltreatment of animals. Biologist Rune A. told NBC News after the death of FREYA, quote, "Too often we kill the animals we don't like or can't cope with. It's an outrage in Norway how we are treating these kinds of animals." In the wake of FREYA's passing, a movement was born. Their goal? Raising $25,000 to immortalize her in the form of a bronze sculpture. April 29th of this year, a life-sized statue was unveiled and depicted a relaxed FREYA on her side, the way she was often seen. To many wildlife activists, FREYA's story represents the mistreatment of animals in the wild and the repeated examples of human interference in nature. Along with the statue comes a powerful plea for both Norwegians and the global community to reconsider their relationship with wildlife and treat them with respect and dignity. Back to you on the desk.
After the break, do college rankings really matter? Our own Lance Willem joins us to discuss. Stay with us.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Welcome back. North Carolina is one of the most gerrymandered states in the nation, according to the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. Politicat's Kunjal Bastola takes a look at the recent ruling that could have severe political repercussions for the 2024 election. Kunjal?
Thanks, Ananya. North Carolina has a history of creating political advantages through gerrymandering, with the most recent redrawing of districts created favoring Democrats. But now with a Republican majority, the maps look set to change to favor the other side. And a recent ruling just might make it worse. The GOP-controlled State Supreme Court recently reversed a ruling that declared partisan gerrymandering illegal. This 5-2 decision made by the majority Republican Supreme Court came on Friday, April 28th, and allows the Republican-controlled legislature to redraw the state's district boundaries, meaning they can redraw boundaries to favor GOP candidates. Earlier in March, the state Supreme Court heard the case for why partisan gerrymandering should be left to legislators. Take a listen.
That is not fair to the legislature. That is uprooting the constitutional duty of redistricting from the legislature, and it is arrogating it to this court and to the trial courts.
With North Carolina's Congress currently evenly divided at 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats, this ruling paves the way for a majority Republican Congress. Let's take a look into South Carolina for an example as to what could happen. In the southern state, the 2019 U.S. Supreme Court ruling declaring partisan gerrymandering in the United States to be lawful allowed South Carolina lawmakers to redraw district boundaries for political advantages. On January 6th of this year, the federal district court in the state ruled that these new boundaries targeted and minimized the voting power of black constituents. The court claims Republicans took part in racial sorting by excluding black voters out of an increasingly diverse and politically competitive congressional district, citing days of testimony and a court record, including text messages between lawmakers, as evidence. The weaponization of gerrymandering to fit a party's political agenda and favor their own politicians will be on voters' minds as key issues are at the center of the upcoming 2024 elections. Jonas?
Thanks, Kinjal. May 1st was College Decision Day, and as many students made the tough choice in where to spend their years in higher education, they turned to the decades-long tradition of college rankings for guidance. Politicat's Lance Wilhelm has been examining the role college rankings have played in college applications and decision processes. Lance is here in the studio with us. So Lance, could you start down by breaking down exactly how a college rank is determined?
Right, and I'm going to focus on U.S. News & World Report just because that's the most predominant system of college rankings out there. U.S. News & World Report uses 6 categories of criteria to rank colleges, and that is outcomes, faculty resources, financial resources, student excellence, alumni giving, and expert opinion. And you can see the percentages that are allocated to those categories on your screen now. But I want to focus on expert opinion just because that's the most controversial category that they use. And the way that is done is they send out a peer assessment survey to deans and presidents to a bunch of universities in the United States. And those deans and presidents then vote on the reputation that they feel other universities deserve. And the reason it's so controversial is because, generally speaking, the most prestigious universities like to keep themselves on top. So it's kind of a unspoken agreement between all the top universities to keep themselves on top and keep the schools that are lower than them, which is why it's so controversial.
And what effects do we see as a result of these schools' rankings, Lance?
So, I mean, really you see colleges bending over backwards to increase their rankings. Columbia University, of course, made waves in this past year for lying about college data to U.S. News & World Report in order to inflate their ranking. But I want to focus on Northeastern University for a moment, who went on a decades-long mission to increase their ranking, and they did. They ended up being number 44 on the most recent college list. And they did that by manipulating some factors that U.S. News uses to rank colleges, specifically acceptance rate, which is no longer used. What they did was they use tactics like getting rid of their application essay to inflate the number of people who apply to their school, driving down acceptance rates and increasing their ranking. Although acceptance rate is no longer used in the current U.S. News ranking system, it's a really good example of how colleges can manipulate the system to their benefit.
So Lance, let's not miss the forest for the trees here. Knowing all of that, do college rankings actually matter?
Right, and that's a tough question, Jonas. There is a 2007 study that points to a correlation between endowments and ranking, but really, college rankings really only matter for as long as people pretend they matter, if that makes sense. It's really difficult to put a number on an education when there are so many different factors involved, and that's why it's so important to look at other factors that are involved when picking a college, not just the ranking.
Thank you so much for joining us, Lance. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Politicat. Have a good night.